Hello and welcome to a Talmud Israeli production. Today we'll go through the highlights of this week's Daf Yomi study, Masechet Shabbat, pages 58 through 64, Dapim Nunchet through Samach Daled. 58. We are told in the Gemara that if a person wears a talit mekupelet, a talit which is folded over and resting on their shoulder, that is not considered an act of wearing, but rather an act of carrying in the public domain and would be a Sabbath violation. Accordingly, the rabbis who worked in the house of the Exilarch, the Reish Galuta, the leader of the Jewish community of Babylonia, they were not allowed to go out in the public domain on Shabbat wearing a cloak that had the emblem of the Exilarch's house on it. Why? Out of fear that the emblem might fall off the cloak, and then out of fear of being considered insubordinate for wearing a cloak without the emblem, the rabbi might fold it over to conceal the missing emblem and then be guilty of carrying in the public domain on Shabbat. 59. The Gemara says that a great tall man who had a limp came to Naharda, from the land of Israel, and issued a halachic ruling that klila, that a tiara, is allowed to be worn in the public domain on Shabbat. Rav wondered, who is this great tall man with a limp? He said, it's Levi. Levi was a rabbi from the land of Israel who was a colleague of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. And one day he wanted to show Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi the proper method for prostrating oneself, to bow down, known as kida. And it's a complicated, physically complicated method, as a result of which he pulled a muscle and was permanently developing a limp. Samach, Daf 60. The Mishnah tells us, Lo yetzei ha'ish b'sandal misumar. A person should not go out into the public domain on Shabbat with a hobnailed sandal. In other words, a sandal with spikes. The Gemara tells a story that there was a sad incident in which Jews were gathered in a cave, and the enemy was coming, and as a result of people wearing hobnailed spikes, many people died. Even more people died from the trampling effect than were killed by the enemy. So the Gemara wonders, why is it only forbidden to wear these kind of shoes, these dangerous shoes, on Shabbat? Even during the week, even the Yemot Chol, it should be forbidden, 7 days a week. So the Gemara responds, well, the incident in question happened on Shabbat, therefore the ruling only applies on Shabbat. But then the Gemara notes that on Yom Tov the ruling also applies, so why should it apply on Yom Tov? To this the Gemara responds, because Yom Tov is similar to Shabbat in that there is a large public gathering. Rashi explains, what is this public gathering? She'ein osin melacha, because people don't go to work on those days. Nikbatzim, we gather together, l'batei knesiot, in the synagogues, l'batei midrashot, and in the houses of study, Torah study. 61. Here the Gemara tells us that we are not supposed to go out in the public domain wearing tefillin on Shabbat, but that if one does go out wearing tefillin, one is not liable for a sin offering. In other words, it's not a biblical transgression to wear tefillin in the public area on Shabbat. To this, the Gemara says that even according to the opinion that Shabbat is an appropriate time for wearing tefillin, you still shouldn't go out in the public domain with it. Why? Because you might take it off, whether to use the latrine, to use the bathroom, or whatever reason, and end up carrying it in the public domain. And that even according to the school of thought that Shabbat is not an appropriate time for tefillin, you are still not going to be liable for a sin offering, because if you wear it, you do so as headgear, as headdress, and you don't actually carry it in your hand. And since you're wearing something, it's like clothing, it does not rise to the level of carrying as a transgression. 62, Samach Bet. There's a question whether or not tefillin is considered a positive time-bound commandment. Mitzvat aseh shehazman gurama. There is a general rule in the Talmud that for positive time-bound commandments, women are exempt, nashim piturot. And for positive commandments that are not time-bound, women are obligated, nashim chayavot. What is the status of tefillin? Well, there are two categories of time about which we might say that we don't wear tefillin. One, as was mentioned a few moments ago, is Shabbat, Sabbath and holidays. Is it an appropriate time or an inappropriate time for tefillin? One school of thought said yes, and one school of thought said no. Of course, popular practice is one school of thought whether or not is the nighttime an appropriate occasion for tefillin wearing, or is it not? Two different Tannaitic schools of thought. Of course, we know the answer in our times is no. And on the basis of the no for Shabbat and Yom Tov on the one hand and Laila, the nighttime, on the other, we conventionally say that tefillin is a mitzvah taseh shazman garama, and therefore women are exempt. 63. Samach Gimel. Shmuel says the following. Ein bein ha'olam ha'azeh limot ha'mashiach. There's no difference between our world and messianic times, ela shibud malchiot bilvad, except for subservience to foreign subjugation. In other words, if the Jews control their own destiny in their own land, that is messianic times. Tosfot is slightly discomfited by this and notes that in our time, meaning in the 12th century in France, any Yerushalayim in Beit HaMikdash. We don't have Jerusalem, we don't have the Holy Temple. But in Messianic times, all of that stuff will be rebuilt. So therefore, it must be that Ein Bain, there's no difference between this and that, in the words of Shmuel, was imprecise. That Shmuel meant there are going to be more differences than just subjugation to foreign rule, but that it may be the primary difference. Samach Daled, 64. The Mishnah tells us, Shein Shel Zahav, a gold tooth. There's a question, can you wear that gold tooth, that denture, out in the public domain on Shabbat? Rabbi allows it, and the sages forbid it. Rashi explains why the sages forbid the gold tooth, because it looks differently than your other teeth. It stands out, and so a person might be embarrassed. People might laugh at that individual for wearing a gold tooth. And so since there's the possibility of public shame, there's also the possibility that the person will remove the gold tooth while out in the public domain on Shabbat and carry it back into the private area. And so, lest a person be guilty of Isur Hotza'ah on account of the embarrassment associated with the gold tooth, a person should not wear it